Daniel Carter had a system. 6:15 every morning, the alarm. 6:30. Lily's bedroom door, a soft knock, never a shout. Because Lily was 7 years old and the world was loud enough without her father adding to it. 6:45. Oatmeal with blueberries. The berries arranged in a smiley face on the surface of the bowl because Lily had once laughed at it and now it was simply what breakfast looked like. 7:10. The walk to Maplewood Elementary. 8 minutes if they moved at a steady pace. 12 if Lily spotted a caterpillar or a particularly interesting crack in the sidewalk, which happened more than one might expect for early November in Burlington, Vermont. Daniel had learned to leave 12 minutes of margin. He was 35 years old, employed as a senior data engineer at Orion Systems, and he had not been on a date in 2 years. Not because he lacked options, his colleague Marcus Webb had been attempting to set him up with someone named Patricia for the better part of 6 months, but because the math of his life did not seem to leave room for it. There was Lily to consider. There was the commute. There were the board game nights on Thursdays that Lily had declared sacred, and the Saturday afternoon library runs, and the Sunday afternoons when they cooked together, Lily standing on her step stool in a child's apron that read Junior Chef in block letters. Daniel had not been unhappy. That was the thing people always seemed to get wrong when they found out he was a single father raising a daughter alone. They assumed the word alone implied something broken. It did not. It implied something deliberate. His marriage to Christine had ended when Lily was 14 months old. Christine had not been cruel about it. She had been honest, which in some ways was worse. She said she had never wanted the life they had built together, that she had agreed to it out of a misunderstanding of her own desires, and that staying would only teach their daughter a version of love that was really just obligation wearing its good clothes. She had moved to Portland, Oregon. She called on birthdays. The arrangement was, as far as these things go, civilized. Daniel had stopped believing in easy love after that. Not all love, just the kind that arrived without cost. At Orion Systems, he occupied a comfortable corner of the engineering floor on the 4th level of a converted brick building on Elm Street. His work involved pipeline architecture and the kind of database optimization that made other engineers visibly relieved when he walked into a meeting. He was good at it. He kept his head down. He did not involve himself in office politics. He had never, in 2 years at the company, had a direct conversation with Victoria Hale. This was not unusual. Victoria was the chief executive officer. There were 140 employees at Orion Systems. Victoria operated at a remove that was not unfriendly but was clearly intentional, a professional boundary she maintained with the precision of someone who had learned, at some point, that proximity and authority made poor neighbors. Daniel knew what most employees knew, that she had joined the company 5 years ago as a strategic hire, that she had rebuilt the executive team within 18 months, that under her leadership, Orion had grown its annual revenue by roughly 200%. He also knew, from office conversation he had not sought out, that she was 38, that she did not attend company social functions, and that her assistant, a meticulous man named Gerald Fitch, scheduled her calendar with the rigor of an air traffic controller. None of this explained why, on a Tuesday morning in the first week of November, Daniel arrived at his desk to find an email from Gerald Fitch, subject line, a message from Miss Hale containing 6 words. He read them twice. Then he read them again. The message was brief, to the point of being strange. Daniel read it a 3rd time looking for the part that explained what it meant. He found nothing. His first thought was that it was misdirected. Orion employed a Daniel Carson in the legal department and a David Carter in sales. Either name might account for a clerical error. He composed a reply asking Gerald to confirm the intended recipient, and sent it before he had fully decided whether he wanted to. Gerald responded in 11 minutes. The invitation is addressed to Daniel Carter, Senior Data Engineer, 4th floor. Miss Hale confirms this is correct. Daniel sat with this information for a long moment. He had met Victoria Hale once, at the previous year's all-staff meeting in the atrium on the ground floor. She had delivered a 20-minute presentation on the company's strategic direction. He had been seated in the third row. She had not, as far as he could recall, looked in his direction. He was not the kind of person who registered in rooms not unpleasantly so, but he occupied space with a kind of self-contained quietness that he had always found practical. He spent the next hour attempting to work and finding that he could not. The pipeline he was optimizing required focus, and his focus had been redistributed entirely. He opened the email twice more. He looked out the window at the street below, where a pair of pigeons were disputing a pretzel in the guttered November light, and wondered, not for the first time, whether his life had taken on a quality of willful smallness that he had mistaken for discipline. He was not dissatisfied, he told himself, but there was a particular category of experience he had closed the door on, not slammed it, just eased it shut, and he was aware, in the way you become aware of a draft in a room that has been closed for a long time, that the door existed and that he had put it there. He walked to the break room. Marcus Webb was there, refilling a coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Developer" in letters that were slightly too small to read across a table. Marcus was 32, easily enthusiastic, and constitutionally incapable of minding his own business. Daniel had learned to appreciate this. "Marcus," Daniel said, "have you ever received a direct email from the CEO's office?" Marcus turned around. "No." "Why?" "Did you?" Daniel showed him the phone. Marcus read it once. Then he looked up with an expression Daniel could not immediately categorize. "She's asking you on a date. She's asking me to dinner. On Halloween, alone. To a restaurant, not a conference room. Daniel, she's asking you on a date. That is not what that says. What do you think 'come alone' means?" Daniel did not have a satisfying answer. He took his coffee back to his desk and sat there for most of the morning thinking about it. By afternoon, he had considered a reasonable range of explanations. Perhaps Victoria had discovered some issue with his work and preferred to address it informally. Perhaps there was a restructuring being planned and she was conducting individual consultations. Perhaps, and this seemed, in aggregate, the most likely explanation, she had sent the invitation to the wrong person, and Gerald, rather than admit the error, had doubled down on it. He typed his reply. He would attend. He told himself it was curiosity. He arranged for his neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Ruth Garland, to watch Lily on Friday evening. Then he went home and said nothing about it to his daughter, because he had no idea what he would have said. Halloween in Burlington had a particular quality that Daniel had come to appreciate over 2 years of living there. It was not the rowdy, high-volume Halloween of college towns, nor the purely commercial kind of shopping district event. It was a neighborhood thing, the kind of evening where porch lights stayed on late and parents in coats walked behind small ghosts and astronauts and one very determined 7-year-old who had decided, without external influence, to be Amelia Earhart. Lily had spent 3 weeks perfecting the brown leather jacket. She was, by the time Friday arrived, devastated that her father would miss the first hour of trick-or-treating on Copley Street, which she had identified as the optimal route based on a surveying methodology she declined to explain in full. Ruth Garland had promised to accompany her with complete competence. Lily remained unimpressed by this information. "Why do you have to go to dinner tonight?" she asked, sitting on the bathroom counter while Daniel knotted his tie. She was already in costume. The leather jacket was too big at the shoulders in a way that somehow looked intentional. "Work," Daniel said, which was true in the narrowest sense. On Halloween, some things don't follow schedules. Lily considered this with the gravity of someone weighing a legal argument. "Amelia Earhart didn't follow schedules either," she said. "She just went wherever she needed to go. That's a reasonable point. You could bring me. I can't bring you. Why not?" "Because I'm meeting someone, and it wouldn't be appropriate." Lily narrowed her eyes. She had her mother's eyes, not Christine's, but Daniel's own mother, who had died of a cardiac event when he was 26, and whom he still missed with a dull, persistent ache. Brown and direct, and skeptical of inadequate explanations. "Is it a date?" Daniel looked at her in the mirror. "How do you know what a date is?" "I'm 7, not a baby." "It's a work dinner. Those are not the same thing as a date." "Correct. You tied your tie too tight." He loosened it. She was right. He walked to Church Street rather than drive, because parking on Halloween in the downtown core was a particular form of suffering he had learned to avoid. The air was cold and smelled of wood smoke and somebody's cider-scented candle. Children moved in packs on the sidewalks. A group of teenagers, clearly too old for this in their own estimation, were trick-or-treating anyway, with a defiant cheerfulness he found genuinely charming. The Black Lantern occupied the ground floor of a building on the south end of Church Street. It had been there for 30 years, which in Vermont restaurant terms was geological. The exterior was sandstone and dark-framed windows. On ordinary evenings, it served local cuisine and wine at prices that implied occasion. Tonight, it was strung with orange lights, and a pair of carved pumpkins flanked the entrance with the particular solemnity of centuries. Daniel stood outside for a moment. He had no category for this evening. He did not know what he was walking into. He pushed open the door. The interior of the Black Lantern was warm and amber-lit. The Halloween decorations were tasteful, dried corn husks in the entryway, white candles in black holders at each table, a wreath of autumn leaves above the bar. The jazz that played through the speakers was something slow and minimal, with a lot of upright bass. A hostess guided Daniel toward the back. He saw Victoria Hale before he registered who he was looking at. She was seated at a corner table, angled slightly away from the room, a glass of sparkling water in front of her. She wore a black dress with a simple collar and no jewelry except small stud earrings. She had dark hair pulled back and the kind of stillness about her that made the air around her seem quieter. She was not in costume. She looked, if anything, like someone who had arrived early and used the extra time to become entirely composed. And beside her, in the chair to her left, sat a small girl. The girl was wearing a witch costume, a black hat with the brim curled just slightly at one side, a dark dress with a silver moon embroidered on the hem. She had a small plastic pumpkin bucket in the shape of a cat's face resting on the table beside the bread basket. She was examining the menu with great seriousness. Victoria stood when she saw Daniel approach. "Mr. Carter." She extended her hand. Her handshake was firm and brief. "Thank you for coming." "Of course," he said, which was automatic. The girl looked up, and Daniel's mind did something unusual. It stopped. Not the kind of stop that means nothing, the kind that means something in the room has arranged itself in a way the brain needs extra time to process. The girl had brown eyes, a sprinkle of freckles across the bridge of her nose, dark hair with a slight wave, a gap between her two front teeth that was in the exact same position as the gap in Lily's. "This is my daughter," Victoria said, sitting back down. Emily set down the menu. "Hi," she said. "Are you the person my mom wanted to meet?" "I think so," Daniel said carefully. "She was very secretive about it," Emily said, with the frankness of someone who found adult behavior consistently puzzling. "She made me promise not to ask too many questions." "I've been counting." "Counting what?" "How many questions I ask." She looked at her mother. "That was 3. I get 10. Victoria's expression changed slightly, something between exasperation and undisguised warmth. It was the most human Daniel had yet seen her look. "Emily, what?" "You said 10. Daniel sat down. He looked across the table at the CEO of his company, who was watching him with an unreadable expression that nevertheless seemed to contain something like anxiety, and at the small girl beside her who was now counting on her fingers. 4, Emily announced. "That last thing I said was a statement, though, not a question. Does it count?" "Statements don't count," Daniel said. Emily looked satisfied. "Good." The waiter came. They ordered. Emily had already decided on the pasta with butter, which she announced with the confidence of someone who had surveyed the menu and found it lacking in suitable alternatives. Victoria ordered the salmon. Daniel ordered the roasted chicken without reading the description. He was finding it difficult to read anything. Every time he looked at Emily, something in his chest performed an action that was not quite any emotion he had words for. She was animated in a particular way, not loud, not demanding, but present in the room in a way that took up its full share of space without apology. She asked the waiter what the soup of the day was. When he explained it, she said, "That sounds like it was made for people who enjoy being sad." And the waiter, clearly not expecting this, laughed genuinely. She had Lily's laugh. Not similar to Lily's laugh. Lily's laugh. Daniel told himself that this was the pareidolia of a tired mind, the human tendency to find patterns where coincidence had merely placed similar pieces. Children of similar ages could look alike without meaning anything by it. A laugh was not a fingerprint. Victoria was watching him watch her daughter. "She's 7, Victoria said, when Emily had turned away to observe 2 adults at a nearby table who were in an argument she found more interesting than the bread. "So is my daughter," Daniel said. "Yes." Victoria's voice was very even. "I know." Something shifted in the temperature of the conversation. "How do you know about Lily?" Daniel asked. Victoria wrapped both hands around her water glass. It seemed like something she did when she needed a moment to choose her words with care. "I looked at your personnel file. Before I sent the invitation," she said it without apology, but also without ease. "I know that's not entirely comfortable to hear. What were you looking for?" She held his gaze. "A date of birth." Daniel said nothing. "Emily was born in March," Victoria said. 7 years ago. So was Lily." "I know." The jazz from the speakers moved through a slow chord change. Emily was now studying a nearby jack-o'-lantern with the concentrated attention of an expert appraiser. "Miss Hale," Daniel said. He kept his voice low and level. "What exactly are you telling me?" Victoria set down the water glass. She appeared to make a decision. "I'm not telling you anything yet," she said. "Not with any certainty. I'm asking you to hear something, and then I want to know, does any of it sound familiar to you?" She told it carefully, without embellishment. The way someone tells a story they have rehearsed so many times that the emotion has been replaced by precision. 9 years ago, she had been 30 at the time, Victoria had attended a technology conference in Boston. It was a 3-day industry event at a hotel in the Back Bay. She had been a director of product strategy at the time, 2 years from the promotion that would eventually bring her to Orion Systems. She had been focused and ambitious and, she said with a flatness that made the admission feel honest rather than self-pitying, also quite lonely in a way she had not yet learned to acknowledge. On the second evening of the conference, there had been a dinner reception. She had spoken with a man, a software engineer from a small Vermont firm, she thought, though the firm's name was gone now. They had talked for most of the evening. He was quiet, but precise. He listened in the way that people rarely did at events designed for networking. They had left together. She did not need to elaborate on what leaving together meant. The following morning, she had woken to an empty room and a note that was not unkind, but was final. He had an early flight. She did not have his contact information. She had not pursued it. That was the sum of it. 6 weeks later, Victoria said, "I found out I was pregnant." She had not tried to locate the man. She had, she said, considered it briefly and then concluded that it was not what she wanted, that what she wanted was the child, and that the child did not require a reluctant participant. She had told no one the full story. She had told Emily, when Emily began asking, that her father was someone her mother had cared for briefly, and that he was not part of their life, and that this was not a sadness, just a shape things had taken. Emily had accepted this with 7-year-old equanimity and then asked for more screen time, which Victoria had granted once. Last month, Victoria said, Emily's school did a heritage project. They asked the children to bring in something from their family's history. Emily found a photograph, one my mother had taken at a family gathering years ago, of my brother. She paused. My brother, Patrick, is 38, brown hair, gap in his front teeth. When Emily held up that photograph, her teacher said, Victoria stopped, composed herself. Her teacher said, Emily, is this your dad? Daniel was very still. Emily said no, but the question stayed with her. She asked me that night if she had a father somewhere. Victoria looked down at her hands. I couldn't tell her I didn't know, and I couldn't tell her I hadn't looked. She had begun, quietly, reviewing records she had access to through the company's HR systems. Not the full files, she clarified. Just dates and department information, the kind of data a CEO could legitimately access for workforce planning purposes. She had been looking for something specific, a male employee in the right age range, with a child born in the same spring, who had attended industry events in the relevant years. There were 3 people who broadly fit, she said. I ruled out 2 fairly quickly. The third was you. Daniel said, Boston. Victoria looked at him. Second evening of the conference, he said slowly. There was a dinner reception in the main ballroom. I spoke with someone for most of the night. She was. He stopped. He looked at her. She held very still. Her hair was down, he said. She had a glass of wine she kept forgetting to drink. Victoria exhaled. It was the smallest sound. Yes, Emily had eaten most of her pasta and was now conducting what appeared to be a detailed investigation of the texture of the tablecloth. She looked up when the conversation quieted. She was not oblivious. She had the perceptiveness of a child raised by a very attentive parent, the habit of reading emotional registers in a room. Are you 2 being serious? She asked. Yes, Victoria said. About me? Victoria looked at Daniel. There was a question in it. Daniel said, We're talking about something that happened a long time ago. Before you were born. Emily considered this. We don't know yet, Daniel said. Emily seemed to find this an acceptable answer. She went back to the tablecloth investigation. Victoria said, quietly, I'm not asking you for anything. I want to be clear about that. I don't know with any certainty that this is what I think it is, but I thought if there was a possibility, then not telling you was also a choice. And I didn't want to make that choice by default. You could have come to me directly. Yes, I considered that. She picked up her fork, turned it in her fingers, set it down. I thought this was better. Neutral ground. A restaurant on Halloween with your daughter present is neutral ground? I wanted you to meet her, Victoria said, simply. Because people treat children differently when they know they might be connected to them. I wanted your first impression to be, she paused, to be just Emily. Daniel sat back in his chair. He understood the logic of it. He did not entirely agree with it. But he understood it. He looked at Emily, who had found something of apparent great interest in the weave of the tablecloth near her elbow and was tracing it with one finger. He thought of Lily at home, on Copley Street by now, walking up someone's front path in her leather jacket and her aviator cap, holding her bag open with both hands because she had a method for this. She had a methodology for everything. He said, What do you want to do from here? Victoria said, A test, if you're willing. A proper one, through a licensed lab, nothing informal. And if it confirms, then we figure out the rest, she said. Carefully, with the children involved in the conversation at the right time, in the right way. Not before. You've thought about this. I've had 6 weeks to think about nothing else, she said. They stayed through dessert, which Emily selected with the ceremony of a formal occasion. A chocolate mousse she described afterward as exactly the right amount of serious. Victoria and Daniel spoke around Emily rather than through her, the way 2 adults negotiate a subject that belongs to them but orbits a third person who is not yet ready to be fully inside it. They talked about the conference, briefly, filling in the gaps with the gentle strangeness of 2 people who shared a history they had not known they shared. They talked about their children carefully, warmly, in the way parents talk when they recognize something in each other. Emily fell asleep in her chair at 9:15. She did it suddenly and completely. The way only children and the very tired can one moment alert, the next entirely absent from the room. Her head tipping to rest against her mother's arm. Victoria shifted without looking, making room for her, her whole body adjusting with the automatic ease of long practice. Daniel watched this without comment. There was something in it, the small, mechanical fluency of a parent and child who have spent years negotiating the physical logistics of being together, that moved him in a way he hadn't expected. He said, "She's good." "She is," Victoria said. She was looking at Emily with an expression that was not separate from the rest of her face, the way professional composure usually was. It was just her. "She's the best thing I've done." They paid the bill with a brief, civilized disagreement that Victoria won by the simple expedient of handing her card to the waiter before Daniel had found his wallet. He let it go. Outside, the evening had cooled further. The street was quieter, now the younger children long since home, the older ones scattered. A handful of jack-o'-lanterns still burned on nearby stoops. The orange lights of the black lantern hummed faintly above the entrance. Victoria had Emily draped over one shoulder, the cat-face pumpkin bucket dangling from her free hand. The image of her standing there on the sidewalk with her sleeping daughter, and that particular look of calm determination, made something settle in Daniel's chest. Not romantic, not yet, but something recognized. The specific exhaustion of someone who had done a hard thing alone for a long time and had gotten very good at making it look easy. "I'll have Gerald send you the paperwork for the lab," Victoria said. "There's no rush. Take the time you need. I'll think about it tonight." "Take more than tonight." "I'll still think about it tonight," he said. Something like a smile moved across her face, brief and real. "Good night, Mr. Carter." "Daniel." She looked at him. "Daniel." He watched her walk to a car idling at the corner. The driver, a man in his 50s, stepped out to open the door. Victoria loaded Emily in first, then folded herself in after. The door closed. The car moved. Daniel stood on the sidewalk in the cooling dark for a while. He had not, in 2 years, seriously entertained the possibility that his life was incomplete. He had Lily, and his work, and the Thursdays, and the library. He had constructed a life with good materials, and he had lived in it with commitment. But standing on Church Street on Halloween evening with the smell of candle wax in the air and the sound of distant children receding around the corner, he recognized that something had happened tonight that did not fit neatly inside the category of work, dinner, or administrative curiosity, or even plain coincidence. Something had arrived. He did not know yet what shape it would take, or what it would cost, or whether the cost would feel like loss or like the particular, unexpected relief of a door opened onto a room you had forgotten was there. He turned up his collar against the cold and started walking home. He arrived home at 10:40. Ruth Garland was in the living room with a cup of tea and a book, and she looked up when he came in with an expression that was professionally neutral and personally very curious. "She's asleep," Ruth said. "Got home at 9. She went around the block twice, apparently. Says she did a statistical analysis. She would. How was your dinner?" "Complicated," Daniel said. Ruth Garland had known Daniel for 18 months and had long since determined that when he said complicated, he meant it sincerely and not as an invitation to discuss further. She finished her tea, pulled on her coat, and wished him good night with the tact of someone who had spent 30 years managing classrooms full of children and had developed corresponding expertise in reading when a room needed quiet. He checked on Lily. She was on her back with the Amelia Earhart leather jacket still on, half covered by her comforter. Her hair was spread out on the pillow. She had removed one boot, but not the other, and her feet were at odd angles. She was deeply, entirely asleep. He stood in the doorway. He thought about a girl with the same gap in her front teeth, asleep against her mother's shoulder with her head tipped sideways and her black hat still on. He did not know, standing there, whether Emily was his daughter. The math was possible. The resemblance was striking. But resemblance was not evidence, and possibility was not confirmation. What he knew was that a woman had been carrying a question for 6 weeks, had been sitting with a possibility she could have buried or ignored, and had chosen instead to drive to a restaurant on Halloween, bring her 7-year-old, and hand the question directly to the person it belonged to. He found that he respected it. The precision of the gesture, the willingness to do something awkward in service of something true. He sat down in the chair by Lily's bed, the way he sometimes did when she was sick or when he needed to think. He sat there for a long time. The test was arranged through a licensed clinical genetics laboratory. It required, on Daniel's end, a cheek swab and a single signed consent form. He sent both by courier on a Monday morning, 2 weeks after Halloween. The result arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Gerald Fitch forwarded a sealed email from the laboratory's secure portal. Daniel opened it at his desk with his office door closed, which he almost never did, and which caused his colleague, Renata Bloom, in the adjacent workspace, to wonder briefly if something had gone wrong in his pipeline review. The report was 3 pages. The relevant conclusion was in the second paragraph of the first page. He read it twice. Then he sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for approximately 4 minutes. He called Victoria on her direct line, which Gerald had included in the lab correspondence. She answered on the second ring. "I got the report," he said. "So did I. 99.9%. Yes." A pause that was not uncomfortable so much as full. "How are you?" he asked. She took a moment. "Relieved," she said. "Which I didn't expect. I thought I'd be more complicated than that. But mostly I'm relieved." "Me too," he said. "You've told Lily?" "Not yet. I wanted to figure out what I was going to say first. I haven't told Emily either. I thought we should do it together, if you're willing, with both of them present." He considered this. It was, he thought, another careful choice. The kind of choice that put the children's experience ahead of the adult's comfort. "Yes," he said. "I think that's right. I was thinking we could keep it simple. That they have a sister. That this is a good thing. We can answer questions as they come. They'll have questions. Emily has been asking questions since she could talk. Lily too." He paused. "She informed me last week that she'd done research on mitosis. For a school project. She's 7. Emily wrote a 3-page report on migratory birds and presented it to me at the dinner table. Voluntarily, with handouts, a long beat of silence. And then Daniel laughed a short, genuine sound, surprised out of him. Victoria laughed too, quiet and real. "Saturday?" he said. "Saturday," she agreed. They met at a park first, on neutral ground, at 10 in the morning. Daniel had told Lily they were meeting someone, a woman from work, and her daughter. Lily had put on her favorite sweater, the green one with the stars, and asked if the daughter liked birds. Daniel said he didn't know. Lily said she would bring her bird book, just in case. The park was a small one on the south edge of the downtown core, with a pond and a cluster of maple trees that had dropped most of their leaves now and stood pale and bare in the November light. Daniel arrived first with Lily, who immediately identified the pond and began cataloging the ducks. Victoria arrived 10 minutes later with Emily, who was wearing a yellow coat and carrying, for reasons that were not explained, a small, stuffed rabbit. The girls looked at each other. It was a long look, not self-conscious exactly, more like calibration, the way children assess potential friendships with a direct efficiency that adults have generally learned to mask. Emily said, "Do you know about ducks?" Lily said, "I brought a book," and that, functionally, was that. They sat together at the edge of the pond, with the bird book open between them, Lily explaining the entries with the systematic focus of a docent, Emily asking questions in a pattern that was, Daniel could not help but notice. Remarkably similar to Lily's own method of inquiry. Narrow the subject. Ask specific questions. Build from the answers. He stood near Victoria at a slight distance. "When do we tell them?" he said. "Give it an hour," Victoria said. "Let them just be together first." He nodded. They stood there in the thin winter light, the two of them, watching their daughters sit at the edge of a pond and argue politely about whether mallards made better decisions than eider ducks. It was not, Daniel thought, anything close to what he had imagined his life would look like at 35. But it was specific and warm and very real in the particular way that only unplanned things can be. After an hour, they walked to a nearby coffee shop with outdoor seating and a space heater that worked intermittently. The space heater cycled on and off in unpredictable intervals, producing warmth in irregular bursts that the girls took turns standing near as if it were a campfire. The coffee shop played music that was too quiet to identify and served their drinks in cups with autumn leaves printed on the paper sleeves. Daniel bought hot chocolates for the girls and coffee for himself and Victoria, and they all sat down, and Victoria said, to both children, calmly and without preamble, "There's something we want to tell you both." Emily looked up. Lily went still. "You two are sisters," Victoria said. The girls looked at each other. Lily said, "We just met." "I know. But you've had the same father your whole lives. You just didn't know it." Emily considered this with her head tilted. "So you're my dad?" she asked Daniel. "Yes," he said. "I am." Emily looked at Lily. Lily looked at Emily. "Does that mean I can borrow the bird book?" Emily said. Lily appeared to perform an internal assessment of the risk involved in lending a reference text to a person she had known for 63 minutes. "Yes," she said finally, "but only one section at a time." "That's fair," Emily said. Daniel looked at Victoria. She was watching the girls with an expression that was not composed and not performing, just open and careful and quietly undone by it, the way you get undone by things that arrive after a long time of not knowing whether they would arrive at all. In the weeks that followed, they built something slowly. There was no roadmap for it. They invented the protocol as they went, which felt appropriate given that none of them had arrived here by any conventional route. Lily and Emily had what Daniel came to think of as overlap days, Saturday mornings, every other week. At first, just the four of them in public spaces, and then gradually in each other's homes. Emily came to Daniel's apartment and inspected it with the thoroughness of a building inspector, commenting favorably on the kitchen and less favorably on the living room carpet. Lily went to Victoria's house, a tall, narrow townhouse on a quiet street with exposed brick and more bookshelves than Daniel had ever seen in a private residence, and declared it very serious, which appeared to be high praise. The girls discovered, over several weeks, a list of shared properties that they compiled in a notebook Emily had purchased for this purpose. They both preferred window seats. They both disliked the texture of cooked onions but were willing to tolerate them raw. They both found most television aimed at children condescending. They both had a habit of narrating their own activities quietly to themselves when they were focused, which neither of them had known about the other until they were in the same room, working on separate projects, and both could be heard murmuring to themselves in a steady undertone. This last discovery struck them as enormously significant. They discussed it for 20 minutes. Daniel and Victoria moved more cautiously. This was intentional and mutual. They were two people who had learned to be careful with themselves, each in their own separate way, and who now found themselves sharing something large enough that rushing it would have been a category of carelessness neither of them was willing to commit. There were complications, naturally. Victoria was his employer. This fact sat in the corner of every conversation, like a piece of furniture neither of them had yet decided where to put. They acknowledged it directly. In the second week of November, over the phone while Emily was at a play date, and Lily was doing homework at the kitchen table. Daniel said, "This is a real thing that requires real thought." Victoria said, "I know. I've already spoken with our HR counsel." There are disclosures. There are protocols. It can be managed properly, or not at all. He appreciated that she had already thought it through. He would have found naivety harder to trust than the acknowledgement that something existed to navigate. His friend Marcus, who discovered the situation through the particular osmosis of open-plan offices and Daniel's inability to convincingly change the subject, had exactly one response: a long silence followed by a single, emphatic observation that Daniel declined to repeat. It was not, in the final analysis, unhelpful. They talked, often and at length, sometimes with the children present, sometimes after they'd been put to bed, on the phone or at the kitchen table over coffee that went cold while they were talking. They talked about the children, mostly, and then, over time, about other things. About the conference in Boston and what it had been like to be that age, to be that particular version of themselves. About work and what it cost and what it gave back. About the kind of loneliness that is not the absence of people but the absence of being fully known. Victoria was, Daniel discovered, someone who thought very carefully before she spoke and meant precisely what she said when she did. She had a dry, specific wit that emerged in unguarded moments. She read 3 books at once, always, leaving them at different places around the house so no room was without one. She had strong opinions about pasta preparation that she did not express unless asked, but when asked, the opinions were extensive and well-sourced. He liked her. He liked her in the gradual, evidence-based way that he trusted, not the fast version that confused urgency for feeling, but the kind that built from observation and honesty and the specific, ordinary pleasure of someone's company. He did not say this to her for a long time, and when he did, at the kitchen table of her townhouse on a Tuesday evening in December, while both their daughters were asleep upstairs, having decided, entirely on their own authority, that Lily should sleep over, he said it carefully and without much preamble. "I like you," he said, not as a consequence of the situation, separate from all of it. Victoria turned her coffee cup in her hands. She looked at him across the table with an expression that was open and slightly wary and clearly trying to be neither defensive nor impulsive. "I know," she said. "Is that?" "I know because I feel the same way," she said. "I just wanted to be sure it was real and not just the circumstance doing the work. Have you decided?" "I'm deciding right now," she said. "Give me a moment." He gave her a moment. "Yes," she said. "It's real. Lily decided to be a marine biologist for Halloween. Emily decided to be a lighthouse keeper. No one had suggested either of these options to them. They had arrived at the decisions independently, announced them simultaneously on a Saturday morning in early October, and then spent a long moment looking at each other with the expression of people who have once again discovered a parallel they had not anticipated. "That makes sense," Lily said. "Lighthouses are important for marine biologists." "For navigation," Emily confirmed. "We should coordinate." They coordinated. Halloween in Burlington that year fell on a Friday. The 4 of them went out together on Copley Street, Lily's designated optimal route, which Emily had reviewed and approved, with minor amendments moving through the October dark between pools of porch light. Emily had borrowed the Bird book again. She had, over the preceding 12 months, established a borrowing system with Lily that both girls considered fair and that neither adult had been consulted about. The system was, Daniel thought, probably more sophisticated than any arrangement either of their own libraries had devised. He walked with Victoria a few steps behind the girls. The air was cold and smelled of leaves and candle wax and the particular sweetness of other people's porch lights. Emily and Lily were moving from house to house with the coordinated efficiency of people who have been doing something together long enough to know each other's rhythms. At the house on the corner, Emily held the gate and Lily went first. At the house with the carved pumpkins, Lily rang the bell and Emily thanked the homeowner. They had worked this out between themselves without discussion, in the way that partnerships develop their own grammar over time. "They're good together," Victoria said. "Yes," Daniel said. "I didn't know if they would be. When I was planning all of it, that was the part I was most afraid of. whether they would find each other or whether it would be an obligation we imposed on them. They found each other, Daniel said. They did. Up ahead, the girls had paused at the corner under a streetlight. Emily was consulting something in her coat pocket, a handwritten list, Daniel suspected, knowing Emily. Lily was looking up the street with the evaluative expression of someone making a logistical assessment. They conferred briefly. Then they moved on together, their bags in hand, their costumes distinct and complementary, walking in the easy alignment of two people who have spent enough time beside each other that the space between them knows its own dimensions. Daniel thought about the email that had arrived on a Tuesday morning 13 months ago, that had seemed like a misdelivery or a puzzle or a small administrative error. He thought about a corner table in a restaurant, strung with orange lights, and a small girl in a witch hat examining the tablecloth with the focus of a scientist, and a woman with composed hands telling the truth carefully in the amber dark. He thought about the things that arrive without warning, without ceremony, wearing the face of ordinary coincidence. He thought, there is a version of the world in which I deleted that email. He held Victoria's hand. Up ahead, Emily and Lily turned the corner and disappeared into the Halloween dark, and then came back into view, bags swinging, moving from light to light. Daniel watched them. He thought, I am glad I went.